ICQ Podcast episode 240, Repair and Safety. Well, hello fellow amateur ham radio enthusiasts, and welcome to the 240th episode of the ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, supported by Kevin Kershock and our monthly and annual subscription donors. In this episode, Martin M1MRB W9ICQ is joined by Leslie Golf 0 Charlie India Bravo, Edmund Mike 0 Mike November Golf, and Bill November 3 Juliet India X-Ray to discuss the latest amateur ham radio news. Myself, Colin M6BOY, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode's feature is a feature in relation to repair and safety. Well, as always, it's our donors that keep this podcast advert free, and along with our monthly and annual subscription donors, Kevin Kershock, November 3 Lima Golf Alpha from Sunnyvale, California, kindly sent us along a one-off donation. And a quick message from him says, thanks for the great show, keep it going. So 73 is from Kevin. Kevin, thanks a lot for your donation. And I say those donations certainly do help keep this show advert free for your enjoyment. We would ask you to consider us by visiting www.icqpodcast.com/donate, where anything you can send our way is always greatly appreciated. Well, now we join Martin, Lesman, Edmund and Bill to discuss the latest amateur ham radio news, including plans in Australia for increased foundation power and the removal of more Morse code for amateur radio operator technicians. Hope you enjoy.
Well, hi guys, and welcome to episode 240 of the ICQ Podcast News Roundtable. Tonight we have Mr. Leslie Butterfield G0CIB.
Good evening, Martin. Very nice to be on again.
I'm glad to have you back, Leslie. And as always, we have a bit of fun as well.
Yes. Looking outside, I was saying earlier, just before the prelim, about the weather here. It is scorching hot, absolutely scorching. And we're not used to this in London. We prefer rain. We prefer to be miserable, you know.
Yeah.
Over to you, Martin.
Okay, no problems. We have Mr. Edmund Spicer, M0, MMG.
Good evening, Martin. Hello, everybody.
Hey, mate. And as an extra new joiner to the podcast, Bill Barnes, N3JIX, is with us. Hi, Bill.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
And
welcome, Bill.
Yeah, welcome, Bill, to your first one with us. And Leslie's promised to behave himself and treat you gently, so you're okay.
Me?
Yeah.
When have I ever done anything wrong?
There you go. Well, don't go there.
Let's enough of this silliness. Let's crack on with it.
Okay. Unfortunately, Mr. Matty Nessor is M0NGX is on a plane somewhere over Europe at the moment and can't join us. But I was with him the other day, and he does want to continue doing this. It's just work has been absolutely manic for him recently. So there we go. ARRL members may be the oldest amateur radio operators. It says here, ARRL reports 105-year-old Cliff Cahart, W4KKP, from White Rock, South Carolina. He's still operating. Now, I think that's fantastic. You know, I'm really, really pleased that, you know, the guys are operating, Leslie. I mean, I'm probably the oldest one here. In fact, I know I'm the oldest one in this group. If I was still operating in 41 years' time, I think I'd be really happy. What do you think, Leslie?
Well, Martin, we used to work with a gentleman, and I know him. I know you know him quite well, called Richard Brett, and he used to be 93 and still involved. He was at the time. I'm sad he passed away, but at the time he was involved in the convention and putting bits and pieces together and peer reviewing of articles. And yeah, we can make jokes about the RF fields and all that, as we do. But this is about keeping your brain active, keeping it involved in things, and you know, this is what it's all about. And you know what I'd say to him? I'd say, good on you.
Yeah, I reckon so. Edmund, what do you think, mate?
Well, I don't think I know anybody personally who's over 100. There was somebody in the UK who remained active over the age of 100. I think it was it Laurie Golf 2 Bravo Uniform Papa? I'm stretching my brain here now, but unfortunately he passed away a couple of years ago. I think just before his 101st birthday. So apart from him, I cannot think of anybody I know at all who's a centenarian, let alone somebody who's still an active amateur radio person. But as we've said before on this podcast, the hobby does seem to be very good for keeping the old grey cells going. And a lot of radio amateurs I know, whatever of their age, do seem to be quite youthful with their outlook on life. And I'm really pleased this gent has got a set up there for 80 metres, because I think it says in the show notes, doesn't it, that he's residing in a home somewhere. Well, a lot of homes, I imagine, would restrict any amateur radio people they had living in them to maybe, I don't know, 2 metres and 70 cms through a collinear on the roof. So it's really good that this particular home has given over enough real estate for this chap to be able to string up some kind of 80-metre antenna. So that's very heartening as well. But overall, it's a really good positive news story, isn't it? And amateur radio keeps me in my youth, as I'm sure it does you as well, Martin.
I think so. I've been known to misbehave. I'm never sure whether Martin Rothwell's girlfriend thinks it's him leading me astray or me leading him astray, but either way, we both get into trouble. But
it's definitely you leading him astray, Martin, no question.
Thanks for the vote there. Bill, what do you think on this one?
Well, just like everyone else said, it's a great story. I looked at my log. I didn't work them because, you never know. But the one thing that I noticed in there, he said it was first licensed in 1937. I bet you he has some neat genesis of radio stories to tell. So I bet you he's a riot on the bands, and that's really nice. That exactly what he said at 105, that he's still on the air, at least on 80 meters.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely brilliant. And if he is in a home, as Edmund says, it's really good that they've allowed him a 80-metre antenna up, because, as you say, it's a fair amount of real estate. But looks like quite a few amateurs in the States have past 100. I mean, looking here, Charlie Hellman, W2RP, unfortunately passed away at 106. And Harry Wolf, W6NKT, was 8 days short of 108. So, it does look that, your side of the pond, you're going to live a lot longer if you're an amateur.
Thanks for the vote of confidence.
Well, maybe I better move your side of the pond. I keep saying to people, I've got too much to do. I've got too much on. I'm too busy on things. So, as I say, but this is a lovely story, and I'm sure as amateurs will gain more and more people going over 100 as time comes. So that's a good news story. And the good thing is, it's not just living over 100, it's having a quality of life and having your brain active. Moving on, the WIA, Wireless Institute of Australia, consults on increasing foundation power. And the Wireless Institute of Australia is holding various consultations to increase the foundation power from level to 50 watts and removing some of the other restrictions like the 7 character call signs for foundation license holders, which a lot of logging programs don't like. And yeah, I think it has merit. I think that they want to allow the foundation license holders to do some digital modes and maybe some DIY building, although just how much knowledge they have of the foundation license holder, I'm not sure. I know in the UK you have to be an intermediate or the equivalent of a general in the States before you're allowed to build your own transmitters. Bill, what do you think of this one?
I think it's great that they're asking input, and I look through the list of things that they're asking, what people feel and how strongly they feel, and it's, in addition to the power and access to more bands and the call sign, they're asking, should we let them use some digital modes, let them to do some limited build your own? I mean, I know how some of the countries work, but I can tell you, as a technician, which was the entry level license one of the entry level licenses when I got in, I was building, 2-meter, transmitters and stuff, and it was a learning experience. I built that one UHF kit and stuff, and I was like, oh, okay, so now I have a, UHF 440, FM radio at 1 watt, but it's nice. They were asking a lot of questions here, and they're really interested in input. It looks to me.
Yeah. Well, I think building stuff is down to the individual. There will be some that are more than capable of building good quality gear at the junior levels of license, and there's some at the full level licenses who will be rubbish at it. But I think you have to have some form of yardstick. But building, to me, is something I enjoy. So I think it might be worth putting some caveats in. You have to have it checked, but apart from that, why not let people build things? Good one on that. Edmund, what do you think on this one?
Well, I'll be the first to admit that I don't really know very much about amateur radio in Australia or the licensing regime out there, but the WIA, as far as I know, is the equivalent of the RSGB. So, yes, okay, fair enough, they're consulting, but do they actually have the power to make any changes, or would it be down to the Australian equivalent of Ofcom? Do we know?
Well, we don't. But
my guess, Edmund, is that it would be down to their equivalent of Ofcom. However, as Bill said, it's good about getting input from members. This is what it's all about. Not just committees sitting around making decisions. It's about listening to what members would like, and then making representations. That's what national societies are there for.
Yeah.
The other thing as well is I don't sort of want people to throw things up in a horror and say no, we don't do this. The area in Australia is a lot bigger. We could not do this in the UK because we live in like rabbit hutches so close together. I can't see our power levels changing, but in Australia I do.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I was talking to Martin Rothwell the other day, M0SGL, and he was telling me, he said, hey Martin, he said, I've been on 6 meters since you told me it's open. He said, I was working all over Europe, getting 5 in 9s. He said, and then I suddenly realised that I was only running 5 watts. So, power isn't always everything. However, it will increase your ground wave signal, so you'll be heard by more stations close in. So okay, and the size of Australia, I'd suggest that there's probably very good reasons why you could allow extra power there. But as you say, the UK, we don't really need much more than 100 watts, I would suggest. All the contesters are probably spitting blood now at that statement, but
our properties about the size of a shoebox, and the price is equivalent to the telephone number.
Oh yeah. So, but all in all, it's nice to know that they've actually having a conversation on it and go forward.
Make the conversation. That's the thing.
That's correct. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree that power isn't everything, Martin. As you say, there was a huge opening in Europe on 6 meters sporadic E on about the 18th of June, I think it was. So I'm not surprised that Mr. Rothwell managed to do really well using just 5 watts. So if it was me, if I could remove one of those restrictions and one only, speaking with a vested interest, I use pen and paper for logging most of the time, so I don't have the problem with the 7-digit call signs in logging programs. But if it was me personally, I would sooner remove the restriction on using digital modes rather than allowing a power increase, because if you go from 10 watts to 50 watts, that's going to be, 2 S points at the absolute maximum?
There is an equation, and I can't remember it for the life of me. Yet there is an equation. I think it's Yeah, it's so many times the power equals 1 S point increase. And for the life of me, I can't remember at the moment.
Yeah, I agree with you, Edmund. I agree with you in some ways. So I think that's a good one. Right, moving on. No more Morse code for radio operators and technicians in Jamaica. Now, okay, if this might be an enabler into the hobby, but Morse code still seems to attract a lot of people. But Jamaica is another country that's going with doing away with the Morse code requirement to get a license. What do you think, Edmund?
No more Morse code anymore. It sounds like a Stranglers song, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What do I think? Well, it would be hypocritical of me in the extreme to say, I think we should definitely have a Morse code test still, and isn't it a wonderful thing, when I have been living it up on HF since 2009, albeit with just 10 watts in the early days, then up to 50 and now up to 400 theoretically, without ever passing a Morse test. I agree with the idea that if you make it something that you have to do rather than something that you want to do, then you are a bit less likely to garner enthusiasm. I quite enjoy Morse code. I'm not good at it. I'm getting better very slowly, but I enjoy doing it because I want to do it. If I'd ever had to sit and examine it, I suspect I would feel a bit different. So it's progress, and I think the original reason for having it in, the Morse test in, was so if ships needed to communicate with you on the shared bands using Morse code, you would understand what they were saying to you. Well, ships don't use Morse anymore, do they? So there's no real compulsion to have it there as a safety feature. So, yeah, it's another barrier that's been removed, isn't it? So, good news.
Yeah. Okay. Bill, what do you think? Are you a Morse man? No, I haven't asked you that. Yeah, are you a Morse man?
I am back to learning Morse again after 21 years. And it's blame the soda folks. Anyway, I actually had passed my 5 words permit Morse here, 1998 or something like that. You know, and I get into philosophical debates with, you know, a few of the older guys that, you know, was it important? Is it important anymore? I just know that when I turn down to 40 meters and I scroll down past the RIDI bands on the low end of 40 on an evening night, I'm hearing more Morse stations now doing, unfortunately, too fast code for me to copy usually. Well, at least in the States on 40 meters having rag chews than I've heard in 15 years. So I think it's exactly what was mentioned earlier by Edmund. It's you made people do it. They weren't that interested. Now you're not making people do it. They're kind of getting interested in it as they progress through the hobby.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, you know, as I say, we were on the Belfast, Chris Howard and myself, the weekend with Martin. It's actually Chris, Martin and I were on the Belfast. And we ended up doing about 25 Morse certificates, most of them with Cubs and Scouts. And you know what? They were more interested in doing that and doing the Morse code than probably were the radio, in fairness. But it was, the public still likes Morse. And then they say, well, is it used anymore? And you tune down the bottom of one of the amateur bands and there's somebody rattling away at 25 words a minute. And you go, yeah, that's real Morse going out right this minute on the air. So, yeah, you're right in that I think there's a lot of Morse happening. I think the problem is nowadays is that it's happening, but because you don't have to do it. So, there you go. Leslie,
I think, Martin, that there was a thing where people passed it just to get the next level of license and then promptly forgot it. Now, to me, that was a waste of time. I mess about with it. Yeah, we were making at the club little pixie transceivers, you know, those little tiny things, and we've been doing Morse on that.
Yeah.
And we still mess about with it. Look, the hobby's changing it, and it always will be. I personally don't have a problem. Hey, it's just one of those things. And yeah, people will move on to digital modes. whisper modes, and it's just an evolving part of the hobby. I would say though, if they're going to do away with Morse entirely, has nobody ever watched Independence Day? That's the only thing I can say.
Yeah. Don't want to take too much credence on Hollywood, mate.
No, I know.
Yeah. So there you go. Anyway, an absolutely brilliant tool came available to us within the last week.
Oh yeah, everyone's talking about this. I'm looking through your notes, Martin. Tell me a bit more.
Well, real-time propagation tool goes online. This is the RSGB reported that Jim Bacon, G0CIB, has developed an online tool to show near and real-time critical frequencies over the UK. And we've been looking at this, and it really, really does look phenomenal, you know. So I wonder if they're going to make it available or make the software available to other people or other countries, because I know, Bill, you looked at it and said you wish you had something like this in the UK, didn't you?
Yeah, in the States, the source of the data is one of your global ionospheric radio observatories in Fairford.
Yeah.
And like right now at this moment, while we're having this discussion, you know, it shows a very easy to read plot that, you know, your 3,000 kilometer maximum usable frequency plot is right between, you know, 15 and 16 megahertz. 20's open, guys, go.
Yeah.
It's pretty neat. And it's also, you know, it shows various layers, and it's a different format than I've seen these kind of things in before, and I think it's a little bit easier to read in a lot of respects. And I also noticed in there that they actually pull in some of the weather information too, in case you get some sporadic E. They do have a nice little commentary on the page, and they also have a nice little information file in there that explains how to read this stuff. But it's very impressive.
Yeah, I think it's really good. And Edmund, you were saying you were at home today operating HF, and you were testing it against what you were actually seeing, and it worked, didn't it?
It did. Today we're recording this on Wednesday the 21st of June, and I had a day off work today, midweek, and I spent it playing around on HF, mainly on 40 metres, but I was keeping an ear on all of the other HF bands at various times, and I had this website running the whole time, and broadly speaking, what I was observing on the bands in real time matched what the website was telling me. So when there was a change in conditions and the skip distance lengthened according to the website, that is exactly what I was witnessing on the band in real time. And when the website suggested that 40 metres was going to collapse and be devoid of any signals at all, that's exactly what happened. So, yes, I know it's only one day's worth of observation, and I know that one day isn't a statistically valid sample, but anecdotally it looks like this works pretty well.
Yeah. Well, I'd imagine that contest stations in the UK will probably use it.
Oh, I can see that. I mean, it's always good, you know. You're working on the HF bands, and you sort of intuitively try and get a feel for what's happening on the bands, and or you know, you try and sort of work out in your mind what's happening, and then you've got a piece of kit there that's telling you, boom, what you're thinking is correct, and you know, that just sort of gives you confidence in your own abilities, and you look at it and you go, yeah, this is right. Yeah,
I'll have some of that. Yeah, I know what you mean. So all being all, I think this is a wonderful tool. As I say, if they make the software available, if Jim makes the software available to other people, which can collect data in different parts of the world, I think lots of people would love this. So, absolutely.
The amateur radio fraternity is great for that. We share software. We don't make money out. Well, some companies do, but generally speaking, we share. We make it freely available, and then people go away and improve it.
Yeah. So that's really what open source is all about, isn't it, really? So maybe we were the first open source group. Hi. But, yeah.
Talking about Jim Bacon, G3YLA, he appeared in an episode of the TX Factor a couple of episodes back. In that episode, he was talking mainly about VHF propagation, but in the episode immediately before, there was quite a long sequence on HF propagation, and the name of the chap presenting that one, was it Steve Hartley?
No, it'd be Steve Nichols, I would guess.
Well, we've got 50% of the name right, didn't I?
Yeah.
Was talking about HF propagation. So both of those editions are well worth watching. So if you go on to YouTube and search for TX Factor and search a couple of episodes back, the two sequences, one for HF, then the subsequent episode for VHF, ran sequentially. So you ought to be able to find them quite easily. Well worth a look.
Yeah. Well, there you go, and we give plugs to other podcasts. Hi. But no, Steve used to do a propagation report for us many moons ago when he did his own podcast. We used to run his podcast within ours, but Steve stopped doing that a good few years ago, so unfortunately we can't do that anymore. Right, last news story today: FCC Part 97. Ham radio changes. It looks like the FCC are implementing WRC 12 and as published in the US. So I'm going to get Bill to talk about this because it's your side of the pond. You go first on this one, Bill.
Oh, yeah. So the report and order came out. So that means it's in the Federal Register. It's now the law of the land. However, this is for the reference to the 630 meters and 2200 meter bands.
Yeah.
They're there. We're allowed to use them, but not quite yet. They are working out a coordination effort between the Utility Technology Council because we have a secondary allocation on those bands. The primary allocation is the utility companies for power line communications. And they're just working out coordination where they, if you want to work these bands, you got to let them know. And if you're within a kilometer of an active power line communication, there's going to be restrictions or I don't know, maybe prohibition. It's kind of vague on that, but they're working on the language and how to, let people know how they're going to get a hold of these folks so that they can make that coordination happen.
Is this those bands where you have like a dustbin and you wind your inductor around the dustbin and you have like massive coils to get it anywhere near resident? Is that the type of?
That's what I'm assuming. There were some licenses on a few years ago that were experimental licenses, and some of the pictures of the antennas, it's like half a mile of cable.
Yeah.
I thought my 160 was long.
Yeah.
I know I work for the railways, but they might just object if I nick a load of cabling.
I think they would.
Well,
but
that would be a thing that if we still had telegraph and railroad cable lines running, we could load them up and maybe do some 220 meters. But they pulled them out, or at least around here, years ago.
yeah. Well, they are massive. They are massive aerials for that 600 meter band, I think it is. And you have, as you say, Leslie, massive loading coils, and they're usually horrendously inefficient because most people are running short antennas. But it's interesting to see the states have got it. What do you think, Edmund?
Well, 136 kilohertz or 2,200 meters, I've never got anywhere near that. However, 630 meters or 472 kilohertz, I've been successful with reception on that band. Never managed transmission because, as people have said, you need to wrap miles of wire around several water butts to get enough inductance into the equation. But on receive, I have been successful using Whisper, and the way I did that was I took my 40 meter inverted V dipole clipped identical lengths of wire to each end of it to effectively turn it into an 80-metre inverted V dial, grounded the inner and the outer of the coax together at the receiver, and then on the outer of the receiver's SO239, I connected that to earth and then ran a load of radials along the garden underneath the inverted V, and that worked. Probably didn't work well, but it worked well enough for me to decode quite a few stations from across Europe. So I am hopeful that when we get into the winter here in the Northern Hemisphere, and we have it getting dark early and the long nights, I am hoping one of the things that I've got on my ambitions list is to receive or decode something on 472 kilohertz transatlantically from the US.
Whoa!
I can't wait.
Well, that was a challenge gone down, isn't it, Leslie?
I should say it's experimenters band really. You need to be able to put things together. Like many years ago, I used to do workshop practice. You need to be able to make things, and that's the key to that band. I mean, many years ago, there was a guy, if you remember this, gave a talk at one of the RSGB conventions on this stuff, and it was really, really interesting. But anyway, I look forward to further developments.
Well, it's good news that the States have got VLF now, very low frequency, and as I say, there'll be more and more work going on down there. So I can't say it's a band that overly excites me, but more because of the real estate problems I'd have. I mean, I can't even get a 40-metre dipole up on my plot, so none of this is going to work for me. But I'm pleased that these allocations are being given all around the world, because, there will be people that want to do it, and there will be people who get a lot of fun out of it, and we will learn a lot from it. I'm sure that we'll learn, those who are not doing, will learn from reading the articles produced by those that are doing. So, all in all, that's quite good. And as I say, we're in 2017. It's taken nearly 5 years for the US to implement this, but these things don't move very quickly worldwide. So, as I say, it's happening.
I was actually surprised it only took 5 years.
Yeah, all right. Well, I don't know how long it would normally take. I just thought 5 years seemed a long time, but there you go. That's a good one. Right, well, that concludes our news stories for today. Next thing we normally do is have a quick wander around the news table quickly and find out what each and every one of us has been up to. Leslie, what have you been up to? Come on, own
Well,
up.
the first thing I should say is I've actually got my phone on Facebook at the moment. My shins are being kicked by my friends in Scotland, so I should say hi to them if they're listening to this. They always get a mention, but the Scottish curse they put on me puts all this equipment, and literally the gremlins that people don't see on the finished show is unbelievable. But hey, they do get a mention. Hi guys and girls. Right, what have I been doing? Well, as I mentioned on the last podcast that I did, there's a book come out called Grounding and Bonding for the Radio Amateur, and it's got good practice for electrical safety, lightning protection, and RF management by H. Ward Silver N0 Alpha X-ray. It popped through the letterbox a couple of weeks ago. First thing I've got to say is that, and I should really mention this, and it does in the book, that is the first thing you should do is find out what your local regulations, because each country's got their own regulations. I'm sorry to mention that, but that's the first thing. And in the UK, it should be done by a competent person. However, lightning protection and RF management, I found it extremely interesting, even though it's an American book with American standards. Very, very interesting indeed. It gives lots and lots of references, which, you can look a bit further into the subject. What else is there? Why is this important? Because seeing so many stations being set up where they don't get the RF management right and not understanding what RF does and how it gets into equipment. I've looked at this book in detail, and I think it's going to become a classic.
Yeah, well, it's good news. Maybe I'll ask for it for a birthday or Christmas present, which will be a good one. Sounds like a good book, Leslie. So there you go. Bill, we normally ask what you've been up to since the last podcast, but since it's your first one, what have you been up to radio-wise in the last month?
I was going to say I made some notes earlier because I didn't think I was doing much, but actually I ended up was. I went portable twice to the in-laws. The in-laws have a nice little pavilion out behind their house, and I drug the stuff out there twice in the last month. I did some soda chasing. Still haven't activated yet. Still working on getting permissions to go on some of these mountains. But I did get a Whiskey 1 mountain 4 times, and I actually worked a VE2 in Canada with 10 watts. That was very exciting. And did some DX, and looking at my club log, it looks like the DX was all on RTTY and in Europe. So, and I just got a notice pop up in my email that my spare battery for my radio just arrived at the house. So I will have a nice little surprise when I get home.
Well, that's always a bonus when goodies arrive in the mail. So that's always a goodie. Edmund, you've been up to or about to start a special event station. Do you want to tell us about that and other things you've been up to?
Okay, well, the special event station is Golf Bravo 6 Charlie Romeo Alpha GB6CRA. And this is to mark and celebrate the diamond anniversary, the 60th anniversary of WACRL, WACRL being the World Association of Christian Radio Amateurs and Listeners, which I'm a member of. And it's a bit like what the Worked All Britain group did in 2012 with GX4WAB, the Follow the Torch thing. In their case, every day the call sign transferred to the next radio club along the route that the Olympic torch was taking. In the case of WACRL, it's not quite that fast or furious. Full license holding members can apply to have the call sign for up to a month, and I put an application in and it was granted. So the NOV, Notice of Variation, arrived at midday today, the 21st of June. So I am the custodian of that call sign through until Thursday the 20th of July. So the general aim of the game is to have at least one QSO per day, and hopefully more, to work as many people as possible. And by the time the whole thing is over and the call sign moves on to the next person, I want to have had at least one QSO on every band that exists from 160 metres through to 70 centimetres.
Right. Well, I'm glad you clarified.
And if I had microwave gear, I would go higher than that, but unfortunately I don't have any. So that's the setup here. I've made a start on 40 metres, and the band still isn't great. It's still beset by deep and rapid QSB and long skip distances, as has been the case for quite a while now. Last weekend for Museums on the Air, it was certainly like that. The weekend coming up when the podcast gets released is the second weekend of 2 for Museums on the Air. So if you're listening to this on the Sunday that the podcast gets released, that's day 4. So if you're in the UK or Europe in particular, or anywhere else in the world failing that, have a listen on HF and you might hear some museum stations. And Sporadic E is out there. Not so much today, but about a week ago there was a monster opening that I think Martin Rothwell benefited from. Down here, 4 metres became virtually unusable because it was completely wiped out for quite a while by broadcast stations in the OIRT broadcast band. And if you go onto YouTube and search for my call sign, which is Mike 0 Mike November Golf, I have done a short video of some reception of OIRT broadcast, just in case people weren't previously aware of what that is and what it does and where it comes from. And last but not least, I must say hello to G0CIB, which is the Southampton University Wireless Society, and in particular Christian Mike 0 Uniform Oscar Sierra, which I've got a feeling might stand for University of Southampton. Worked them a couple of weekends back when they were having their radio play day. Worked them through GB3IW on 70 centimetres on the Isle of Wight, but they were also transmitting a slow scan TV on 20 metres. Wasn't able to pick that up. And Christian is on my list of people to work through the FM satellites, which I'm still trying and still failing miserably to have my first QSO through.
Oh, but at least you're
So
trying.
that's it.
It doesn't matter, Edmund. It doesn't matter at all. If it doesn't work 99, it's called the Edison approach. Yeah, it fails lots of times, and when you'll get it, you'll go, yep, that's it.
Well,
And all the mistakes would have made perfect sense.
Well, after trying AO85 quite a few times and not managing it, Christian, who I mentioned there, when he worked me through GB3IW, just mentioned casually, oh yeah, that satellite's really deaf on receive. I was like, oh, thanks, mate. We couldn't have had that QSO 2 weeks ago, could we?
Those things always happen. These always things happen. But it sounds like you've been busy. Well, I've actually operated a fair bit, for me anyway. Last weekend, I was on HMS Belfast with Chris Howard, Martin Rothwell, and we did some more certificates. Bands were pretty poor. We did try and listen out for you for museums on the air, Edmund, but it was just HF was particularly poor for some reason up there, and a lot of the time we had public coming wanting to talk to us, so didn't get a lot of operating done. But I did have about four contacts up there, so that's good for me because I'm not a big operator. Weekend before that, the club did the 2 meter SSB contest, like QRP contest. And
Martin, I actually work the club.
You did. You actually worked us, and that was good. And we said, hi, Leslie. I think you were talking to Chris Howard at the time. I was in the background. I heard you. Either Chris or Matt you were talking to, and I heard you at the time. Also worked Don Field, the practical wireless editor, the whose contest it actually is, the pre-W contest we were in. So it was quite nice to work Don fairly early on. And yeah, I think we worked 82 contacts on QRP, 5 watts or less, in about 6 hours, and I probably got 30 of them, so I was quite pleased. I was on very early and got lots of the early stations, so that was quite good. And generally been pretty busy. Managed to finish the wiring of my microphone into the car better than it was, so the wife's not got this big coil of wire in the footwell anymore. But I thought I'd better get it done before I drive down to Friedrichshafen next month. But that's done. So yeah, I think we've all been pretty busy. So that sounds good. Right. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining us tonight. I'd like to thank Mr. Leslie Butterfield G0CIB.
It's been a pleasure, Martin, and an absolute blast.
No problems, mate. Good to have you. Mr. Edmund Spicer, M0MMG.
Thank you for having me, Martin. Good fun as always.
Yeah. And Mr. Bill Barnes, N3JIX. Thanks for joining us for the first one.
Yes, thank you for inviting me, and thank you, everyone. It was a great time.
Yeah.
Good job, Bill. Good job.
Yeah. And as I say, I'm sure you'll be back for many, many more, Bill. As I say, what the listeners don't hear is the general banter that goes on before and some of the bits I cut
It's
out.
outrageous, I'll tell you. Absolutely outrageous.
Yeah. But we've got to keep the clean rating, Leslie.
Absolutely.
Yes, Leslie.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, guys. I'll say 73s and we'll catch you soon.
Cheerio.
7-3's all.
7-3.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
Now it's time to have a look at the news in brief with me, Colin M6BOY. And we start off in Jamaica, where the Jamaican Spectrum Management Authority has updated the National Frequency Allocation Table, providing spectrum allocation in accordance to the WRC 15 5 MHz allocation at 5351.5 to 5366.5 kHz with a maximum power of 25 watts EIRP. Second Vice President of the Jamaican Amateur Radio Association, Ivor Barrett, 6 Yankee 5 Delta Whiskey, is promoting the use of the band. This weekend of our release of this show, the Jamaican Amateur Radio Field Day will be commencing, and will be taking place at the town of Port Antonio in the parish of Portland on the northeastern end of the island. And this is where Ivor Barrett will be operating using 6 Yankee 5 Romeo Alpha stroke portable to promote the band to amateurs that are attending the field day there. So hopefully they'll get lots of interest in operating that band, and we'll certainly find it very popular for the people of Jamaica. The International Astronomical Union has rewarded space physicist and amateur radio operator Asta Perlin Warneberg, Sierra Mike 3 Uniform Hotel Victor, by designating a celestial body in a name, the Asteroid 11807 Warneberg. Astra is a professor at the Department of Physics at Yuma University. She has made a groundbreaking effort to use scattering radar and study meteors that are activated when small particles penetrate into the atmosphere. The method is now applied to about 10 stations around the world. It increases the ability to study different large flows, smaller particles and details in their interaction with the atmosphere. Asta is also the chair of the Swedish National Committee for Radio Science and has researched together with Gudmund Warneberg, Sierra Mike 3 Bravo Yankee Alpha, who served as the technical manager at the SCAT radar at the university where, as I say, Astra is located. So congratulations on having that asteroid named after you. The IRTS Irish VHF UHF Field Day takes place over the weekend of the 1st and 2nd of July, with contesting covering 5 bands, 50, 70, 144, 432 and 1296 MHz. There's an open section which covers operation across all 5 bands, but there's also restricted sections if you just wish to operate on one band. The contest runs for a 24-hour period from 1400 UTC on Saturday and coincides with similar contests in the UK and continental Europe, providing a great opportunity to work some DX on the higher bands. The Irish ITRS has asked us to advise that this is a field day contest with site and power supply requirements for anyone entering. So we'll put a link on the ICQ podcast website for anyone who's looking for more information on that event. Well, now we head over to our feature in this episode, which is a feature in relation to repair and safety. Hope you enjoy.
And now what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast. Hi guys, this feature is a questions and answers session for 2017. A number of guys and gals have been asking me about all sorts of things about buying second-hand equipment. And buying equipment at a hamfest, or if it's given to you, or if it's not been used for a long time, you need to do some initial checks. Now, this is the sort of thing that starts making people get very worried when I talk about this, but just be aware of them. And what I say here is, if you don't feel confident in doing this, don't. Don't undertake work you can't do. And bearing in mind that anything you do is done at your risk. It's your own risk. So this is only just a guidance. So, why shouldn't I not just plug a radio or a device straight into the mains and switch it on? Well, it can be very costly if you get it wrong, guys. So my suggestion is you do a few initial checks for anything that you either bought or been given or hasn't been used for a long time. Now, the most important check, and you'd be surprised how much fault finding can be done this way and solve so many problems by having a good visual check of the device. You know, having a good look round. Often you see what the problem is without having to go into massive fault finding exercises. Check that the fuses are correct. You know, make sure somebody hasn't replaced the fuse inside with a 6-inch nail. Well, maybe not that bad, but a wrong fuse, a high rated fuse. Make sure that the fuse in the plug is correct. It surprises me how many devices in the UK still have a 13 amp plug fitted with a 13 amp fuse in it. You can get lower fuses, I believe even down as low as 1 amp, but 3 and 5 amp fuses are certainly easily available. Now remember, that fuse is only there to protect the device, not you. And if you fit, say, a 3 amp fuse, it probably won't blow till you get to about 5 amps. But it's there to protect the mains cable from just going up in smoke. If you've got a dead short the far end and you've got a high ampage fuse in, the mains cable is going to get nice and hot and start to melt long before the fuse blows. So check the fuses. Check your power cord. Make sure it's safe. There's no nicks, cuts, no exposed wires. You don't want to get a shock off it. Just a very, very loose suggestion here. If it's a very, very, very old valve radio, bearing in mind most of you won't be doing this, but it's a very, very, very old valve radio, they used to use the mains cable as a mains dropper. So if you shorten the mains cable because it's too long to fit where you want, you increase the voltage in the set. So I don't think you'll come across any of these, but you know, it's worth knowing about. So check the power cord. Check the mains plug. Make sure that it's not damaged. The number of mains plugs that you get damaged on really does annoy me. You know, you see broken plugs where you can put your fingers on the live terminals. So if need be, replace the mains plug. Check the device is earthed properly and make sure the earth's connected. So if it's a metal device and not one of these double insulated ones that doesn't have an earth lead, but if it has an earth pin on your plug, check that your plug is connected all the way through to the chassis or any exposed metal on the device. That way you know the device is earthed, and if the chassis goes live, it'll never go live because it goes to earth and blows the fuse straight away. So that was safety for yourself there, making sure it's earthed. Have a good look round, as I said earlier, for overheating and discoloration of components. If you've got discoloured components, i.e. resistors that the values are looking a bit rough, that's because the resistor is probably running hot. Now that could be that the manufacturer, when they made the device, chose to err on the cheapness and put a half-watt resistor in when they really wanted a 1-watt. That was quite common in televisions in the 1970s. Often resistors would effectively die because they were overworked because there was more power being dissipated with them when they needed a higher wattage resistor. So it could be that, or it could be a fault. And if you've got a discoloured component, you go, yeah, okay, that might be it. Electrolytics tend to suffer over a period of time with a thing called ESR, and we've talked about this before. ESR is effective serial resistance, and it's effectively works the same as putting a resistor in series with the electrolytic, and you can't see this resistance, it's inside the can. Now, often a good visual check over electrolytics will show you the electrolytic bulging at one end, and if they've got a cross in the end of the component and that it's bulged out, you can pretty much guarantee that electrolytics had it. And for small electrolytics, once you see that, just change them. There's nothing you can do with them, just change them straight out. And if you suspect problems with electrolytics, small ones, it's probably just as easy to change them out. If you have an ESR meter, we'll use it. I do, and I found mine to be very, very useful. However, if you ignore all this, you potentially could end up with a live chassis when you switch the thing on. You could also potentially end up with a horribly big bang and big power electrolytics that are running on high voltage might have exploded inside the rig and effectively showered the whole thing with electrolyte and inside to the capacitance. Now, the reason for that is that the electrolytic capacitors, certainly the high voltage big ones, if they've not been used for a long, long time, they tend to effectively stop working as a capacitor. The electrolyte doesn't seem to work very well, so you have to kind of reform them. So if you're going to reform a capacitor, there's a number of ways of doing it, and I'll come on to that later. But for big capacitors, you're obviously going to cost you a lot of money to replace them. If you can reform them and they look good after you've reformed them, then that could save you quite a bit of money. Another question I got asked is, well, why do I need to replace all these old paper capacitors? Well, the reason is that when they were put together, they used paper as a dielectric between the two plates. And the paper has now gone a bit acidic and unfortunately is leaking. So what you'll have is a capacitor that's actually becoming a high value resistor in most cases. So it can go quite low, but predominantly a high value resistor. So if you measure it on a multimeter, you may read resistance, in which case change it straight out. In fairness, often they break down at higher voltages. So even if you're running it into a low voltage device, you might not spot it. But in fairness, change paper capacitors in old pieces of test equipment or old radios that you're working on. This will save you a lot of money in the long run, because not only will it save you heartache when it goes wrong, if they're a coupling capacitor between two stages, you might suddenly find that you're supplying a DC volts onto, say, a grid of a valve when it shouldn't have that, and you could damage the valve for a tuppenny halfpenny capacitor. So, in fairness, one of the quickest things to do is to change them out. If you've got a capacitor leakage tester, then you might want to check them out to see how well they're performing and whether they really do need replacing. But in fairness, by the time you've bought your capacitance leakage tester, or even if you buy a second-hand one at a rally and changed all the capacitors in it to start off to make sure it's good to start with, you're looking at probably about £30 or £40. You might as well just change the capacitors in the first place. Although it is nice sometimes to see if you're dead right and that was the fault. Now, another question is, the guy said to me, do I actually need an isolating transformer? Well, it depends how dangerous you want to live, really. An isolating transformer effectively isolates you and your device from the main supply. Now, that doesn't mean to say it hasn't got high voltage on it, and yes, you can still get a shock of it. But effectively, with a transformer, the primary and secondary will be isolated. So, and we want a one-to-one transformer, so that if we've got, say, 240 volts on one side, we get 240 on the other. In the States, 110 to 110, or 120, 120. So that isolates. But what we have to be aware of is that we really ought to earth the isolating transformer, but we don't really want the earth connected to the secondary, because that could create us problems. If we have the earth leak connected on the secondary, what happens is that that is normally connected straight back to the plug of the isolating transformer, and that earth goes back to the substation where it's connected to the neutral. So it could cause you a lot of problems. So although I don't like working on equipment with the earth lead off effectively, working with an isolation transformer doesn't mean you won't get a shock, but it means that you won't get a massive belt that may kill you, and the isolating transformer may save you. But I will say, if you don't feel comfortable, don't do it. Keep away from it. Now, scopes, the scope lead, the ground connector, that is connected to real ground. If you've got an oscilloscope and you've got it plugged into the main supply, and you've got a piece of equipment and you start fault finding, and then you connect the scope ground to the chassis, effectively you're grounding the chassis, and that could do damage to the scope and all your problems. So if you're running and testing a piece of equipment, run your test equipment on the secondary side as well as the device you're checking, because then you've got it all isolated from the real mains. So that should help you. And be aware, soldering irons. A lot of soldering irons, the mains powered ones, are certainly earthed. So once again, if you're soldering around, and I would not suggest you do this. I've done it in the past myself, and it was a stupid thing to do. But you're soldering while the device is on when you're looking for a dry joint. Now, I wouldn't suggest you do this, but I would certainly think about the earthing on your soldering iron. And if you're going to have potentials of doing anything like that, make sure that you do it on the isolated side. But in fairness, do not solder while the device is on. It doesn't matter, it just could do a lot of damage, and a lot of damage to you. So once again, any devices that are earthed, if you're using it on an isolating transformer, use it on the secondary, because the earth lead will be disconnected on the secondary. Now, variac or light bulb. Well, variacs are a useful device, and what the variac is effectively an auto transformer. They're not often isolating transformers. There are a few that are, but the majority are not isolating transformers. So you've got an auto transformer, which you can bring the voltage up very slowly on a device, and you can possibly take it up above its working voltage as well. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, as I said earlier, if you put mains straight onto a device, you could get an almighty bang and a big problem. So often what you do is you bring the voltage up slowly. So you might switch on a device that's supposed to run on, say, 200 volt, 230 volts AC. You'll bring it up, say, 50 volts, and leave it for an hour or two, and then bring it up a few more volts, and over time you gradually build the device up. Now what happens there is the electrolytic capacitors, the big ones in the power supply, the high voltage ones, gradually recover and reform themselves. So that's the reason for an isolating transformer. And you can equally see, you can get some voltage and measure them, and you can see how the device performs on slightly lower voltage and all those sort of things. So they're quite useful devices, and if you see one at a rally, well worth a pickup. But remember, they're not isolating transformers, so could be useful. Now, I mentioned light bulbs. So what's the significance of a light bulb? Well, if you've got a piece of equipment, you're switching it on for the first time, having done all the checks I suggested earlier, and you think that the electrolytics are going to be okay, what you can do is put a high wattage a light bulb in series with the live connector. And what this will do is, providing you're not drawing too much current, the light bulb will stay switched off. if you've got a short, for argument's sake, or the device goes short when you power up, the fuse won't blow, but the light bulb will come on extremely bright, giving you the warning. So it will effectively drop all of your mains voltage across the light bulb, making it glow absolutely bright, and you know instantly you've got a problem. Now, light bulbs can be very, very useful for reducing the voltage into devices because they're pretty much high wattage resistors, if you think of it that way, and quite cheap high wattage resistors. So, certainly worth a thought using a light bulb. I remember back in the 70s when I was fixing televisions, and we used to have thyristorized line output stages on one particular television, and the only way we could ever fault find it was to put a 100-watt light bulb in series with the HT supply to the thyristors, and then they didn't get too much voltage, and we were able to fault find the problem without blowing the devices up. So it even works on transistorized stuff as well. Well, you can reduce voltage by putting a light bulb in. Last thing I'm going to say is work safe. When I have these discussions with people, I always say work as safe as possible. There are old electricians and there are bold electricians, but there are not very many old and bold electricians. If you're too bold, it bites you. So just be aware, be safe. Now, the next thing you need to do is know what you're doing. So I've talked about some of these things. You can obviously do a lot more look up, but know what you're doing. Have an isolating switch somewhere that you can totally isolate the whole lot in one big go. If there's a problem, if something goes up in smoke quick, bang, you want an isolating switch. Equally, if you get a shock, ideally if somebody in the house needs to know where the isolating switch is or where the fuse box switch is to turn the whole lot off. And here's another one. Try not to work alone. When you're working on high voltages, try and have somebody at least in the house that can come and see if you're all right. If you trip the mains trip or whatever, at least they can come and try and check up on you and brief them in what they have to do if you are shocked by electricity. Make sure they don't rush in and grab hold of you and get a shock as well. Because then we've got two victims. So explain to them what they need to do. It's not difficult, but it certainly could be well worth doing. When working on high voltage, I always recommend people keep one hand in their pocket. Sounds a bit silly, but one hand in your pocket means if you get an electric shock, it's not going across your heart. If you get an electric shock from the right hand to the left hand, it's passed through the heart. So wherever possible, make sure that you keep one hand in your pocket. And that way, it still hurt, but hopefully it won't stop the heart. And one last thing to check up on, make sure that any test probes or test leads are rated at the voltages you want to be working at. Because if they're not, they may break down and bite you. So, if you're working on, say, 300 volts or 500 volts DC and the lead's only rated at, say, 100 volts, be very careful. I wouldn't do it. So it's always worth checking the lead rating. And certainly a number of multimeters come with test leads, and I look at them and I think, are you joking me? They ain't safe. There's no way half these test leads could run 10 amps through them without melting. The meter might do 10 amps, but the leads wouldn't, and I suspect the leads probably wouldn't be much good over 250 volts, where they say, it's capable up to 1,000 volts. Not in my hands, it ain't. So anyway, that's just a little bit of safety. Well, I'd say hopefully this has been of interest. These are some of the questions I've been asked over the last few weeks or months about second-hand equipment and when they buy it and what to do. And hopefully it was of interest to you.
The ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, serving the amateur ham radio community fortnightly since 2008.
Well, thanks, Ed, there for your feature on repair and safety as we now enter the final part of episode 240 of the ICQ podcast. As always, we'd like to thank the monthly and annual subscription donors, along with Kevin Krishok, November 3 Lima Golf Alpha, for their donations and helping to keep the show advert free. We'd like you to consider us by visiting www.icqpodcast.com/donate, where anything you can send our way is always greatly appreciated. While there, feel free to drop us a line, either with your donation or without, to let us know what you think about the show. And Dad, we've got a couple of pieces of feedback from the last episode. And the first one is from Ian McCallum, Mike 0 India Mike Charlie. And he says, hi Martin, enjoyed the review on the Yaesu FT450D. You did the other episode. I have the earlier version of the radio and used it through the 3 different levels of the UK license. I've spoken literally to all the world in mind. Good rig for the money and what it does. 73 for me. And so, as I say, it sounds like Ian concurs with your thoughts that the rig is a good all-rounder. It's good value for money.
I think lots of people, Colin, think it's a good value for money rig and a very good rig. We took a lot of feedback on QRZ. Some of it positive, some of it not so positive. But I've got to say, the reviews were a bit like Marmite, I suppose. Let's say that feature was a bit like Marmite. You either loved it or you hated it. But in fairness, it was done for the right reasons, and I still stand by it's a very good radio. So, it's nice to know what our listeners think, and we don't always get it right on the features. But I think that was a bit of a yin and yang, wasn't it? Yeah, some liked it, some didn't, like always.
Yeah, true. But the thing is, though, it's still on the market. So, it's a radio that's on the market, and sometimes looking at technology, a few years evolved on and seeing how it still sort of shapes up in the big scheme of things, there is still value for that. So, while maybe it's not necessarily a brand new rig on the market, certainly, though, I'm sure there's people that might hit a price point or a feature point that'd be interested. So, as I say, it was good to get all the feedback from all the various sources. Now, the next email came in from Paul Diggle, 2 Echo 0 Golf Lima Oscar, and I know we answered this one very quickly in the back channel because it came in just after the last episode, but his question might be sort of pertinent to anybody else who listened to your previous feature on the Bitax 40, and he was interested to know about any extra custom charges made on the kit. So I know you popped Paul the answer to that, and wonder if you could let everyone else know just in case they're interested.
Yeah, certainly, Colin. Well, in fairness, the customs didn't charge me any extra, and I believe, if I'm right, that transmitters don't hold the same charge as, say, a receiver. A receiver is seen as a domestic piece of equipment, whereas a transceiver or a transmitter is a different tax rate. And often countries will send devices in as gifts or toys or whatever, and at very low value, so you don't end up paying the duty, having to pay duty on it because it's a transceiver. But no, it's I'm not saying that it's a way to get round the duty, but we ought to look at them that way. But no, I've never been charged duty on stuff coming from China or in this case India. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, certainly does. So as we mentioned there, you can contact us via the ICQpodcast.com contact page. You can also get involved as well. We've got a brand page and group pages on Facebook. Dad and I also have Twitter handles, which you can find from the ICQ Podcast webpage, and our also personal LinkedIn profiles, or anywhere you can get hold of us. Feel free to give us a shout. We'd like to thank Leslie, Golf 0 Charlie India Bravo, Edmund, Mike 0 Mike November Golf, and Bill on his debut, November 3 Juliet India X-Ray, for their participation in the News Roundtable. Thank you very much, guys, for getting involved. There's some videos and some audio popped on YouTube as well, if that's your preferred way of finding us. So you can check out YouTube, and there's a couple of playlists there. One is another one, obviously, from the Friedrich Sharma show in 2015, but we're starting to also now post the ICQ podcast episodes to YouTube as well. If anyone's interested in listening that way, you're more than welcome to get your fix of the ICQ podcast from there as well. Well, I think that just about wraps us up for episode 240, Dad. And to think we're a month away from our 9th birthday of doing the ICQ podcast. So that makes me feel a bit old, and I probably better think about heading off to get myself some hair colouring and to try and cover up the greys that I've got over the last 9 years. But more importantly, it's time for you to make a cup of tea for Mum, Mrs. Butler, and I say maybe even see if you got a little treat for her hidden in the cupboard that she doesn't know about yet.
Oh, she knows about everything. You know your mum. No, in fairness, I'll make her a cup of tea when she comes in a minute. And as you say, 9 years completed next month. And considering we thought, let's do 10 and see how it goes, 248, Colin. Only 10 away from 250, so we'll get there. And I'm sure that as long as our listeners keep downloading, we will keep producing them for you. And one thing I always say is, and I mean this sincerely, we thank each and every one of you for your downloads. We really do appreciate them, every one of them. And we'd always like more. So don't forget, tell your friends, tell people down the Ham Club, and just get them to know that we are about. And the more downloads we get, the happier and the more likely we are to continue for another 10 years. Hi. So back to you, Colin.
Yeah, well, as I say, I think that just wraps us nicely. So 73 to yourself, 73 to everybody who's kindly downloaded, and we'll do it all again in a fortnight's time. 73's all.
73.
Freeze 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 all.
73.